We all love a good story. Stories of love and life. Stories that entertain and inspire. And the best stories are the ones that happen to be true. Every Friday night, Jack Devnarain is live in conversation with an iconic South African personality who shares the true stories that shape their remarkable lives. Join us for reality radio as real as it gets. From 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. every Friday night, only on 919. Reality radio, as real as it gets, only on 919.
Hi everyone, happy Friday. You're listening to 919. My name is Jack Devnarain and this is Reality Radio. It's as real as it gets every Friday night from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. where we have a guest live in studio to talk about the stories that shaped their lives. Tonight, what an absolute treat. We have in studio somebody we consider to be one of the most iconic South Africans, especially in the media industry, veteran newsman and broadcaster, Tim Modise. Good to see you, man.
Pleasure, Bro Jack, and thanks for inviting me to spend time with you on your lovely show.
You know, it's been such a long time. Usually you are the one interviewing me. Today I decided I'm going to turn the tables on you.
And very rarely do I grant interviews, but because I owe you one, and I know that you've always pitched up for me, I felt I'm not going to come up with excuses. In your case, let me just pitch up.
I love that. That's very, very kind. Thank you so much for that.
Sure. Thanks very much.
You know, this is... It's a big one for me to have you in studio because I don't think you even realize what a powerful influence you were on so many South Africans as we were coming through the media evolution from the late 80s into the 90s and beyond. Mm-hmm. And we needed to be tuning in to the voices that were actually telling us what was going on at that time. And now I'm going to take you back, but just to give you a perspective on this, you must know that when people mention the name Tim Modise, it actually rings like a church bell, where people actually stop, they listen, there's a moment of silence out of pure reverence and respect. That's what it's like. So just to have you in studio is a big deal for me.
And I appreciate that, and thank you very much for your kind words. I appreciate
no, it's so good to have you. Now, I think some of the most important, most pivotal, most impactful work that you were doing, especially around the time of the early 90s, was around the time that Madiba was facing South African people through the medium of television. You were there, you were part of that. And I think, just correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a time when there was a debate with Madiba and F.W. de Klerk.
Yeah.
That was a global TV audience of about 800 million people.
I'm told, those were the numbers at the time, yes.
What was your role in that moment?
I was one of the panelists who were interviewing both Mr. Mandela and Mr. de Klerk at the time. It was a week or a couple of weeks before elections in South Africa. So elections were already, campaigning was already underway, and the world was very curious to understand what the two leaders at the time, most influential people in terms of the transformation of South Africa into a democratic South Africa, what their thoughts were in terms of democracy, in terms of the economic system, and whether that final lap of the preparations for the elections was going to hold, and that definitely we're going to have the elections. And therefore, how they conducted themselves and responded to the questions, I think that is what the world was curious about.
I think the world, South African people were also... Do you remember how there was a sense of a latent tension that was just being contained because people came into this space, into this debate, into the electioneering process. There was a lot of mistrust.
Absolutely, yes.
There was suspicion, there was fear, there were insecurities all around. And through that, you had to try and maintain a certain reserve so that we were actually listening to each other.
Absolutely.
Do you think we were able to hold that space and honor that space in the way that was needed at the time.
I suppose you mean as South Africans,
Yes,
if we were
yes.
able to do that. Well, remember that there were talks that had gone on prior to the actual debate and the elections.
Yeah.
And that type of tension was always in the air for about 3 years or so in the lead up to 1994. But negotiations, discussions were taking place at the World Trade Center, at the east of Joburg.
Right.
Anyway. So the fact that the CODESA talks would sometimes break up and then they will reconvene and all that, people were more or less used to that at the time and were definitely very full of hope and expectation that elections will happen. And let's also recall that a year prior to the elections being held, Mr. Chris Hani had been assassinated, had been killed. And in a way, as tragic as that was, that compelled all parties now to commit to a date of elections instead of having open-ended negotiations with no date inside of when these elections were going to end. I mean, when these negotiations were going to end. So post what happened with the murder or the assassination of Mr. Chris Hani, all the parties, to a large extent, agreed that they had to commit to a time where negotiations will have been concluded and elections will take place. Because the key thing that put the country on the edge, actually, was more the assassination of Mr. Chris Hani. So how it was managed is the thing that helped South Africans have hope and hold on with that hope that we will get to the finishing line of the negotiations and the elections.
You know, you just bring that moment back so clearly, because it was a scary time. There was no rule book. That was the thing. There was no rule book that we could rely on as South African people to say, there's just been this assassination. One of the architects of our new democracy has been assassinated with the intention of derailing the entire process.
Yes.
So nobody knew what was going to happen. It either was going to completely derail everything that CODESA had established, what our intentions for the new constitution, what the new regime was intended to do. It would have derailed everything. Or, as you say, the commitment was going to say, let's set a date.
Absolutely. So I suppose, the events of that weekend when Mr. Chris Hani was killed gave a sense that we could go either way. We could go the peaceful route and have the elections, which we ultimately had in 94, or within days of the incident happening, that would have a full-scale war along racial lines in the country. And how Mr. Mandela himself that weekend dealt with the matter, addressing the nation on television, explaining and appealing to people to calm down, and basically charting the way forward, that post this, we are going to have the South Africa that we've always wanted, that we've been negotiating for and about, or we go another route. So within days of that happening, the National Party then, with Mr. F.W. de Klerk, committed to setting the date for the elections.
What a time. What do you remember most, your most treasured memories of Madiba?
Oh, as giant of a man as he was very personable once you got to know him. As strict and towering figure as he was, a very friendly person. For me personally, my experience of him was that of a fatherly figure, a man who, as much older as he was and as celebrated as he was, would come down, would go out of his way to know people by name and call you by name. And if he knew a little bit more about you, would also be interested in what was going on in your life. So, I got to be involved in one or two things that were personal to him, like when he was celebrating his birthday and when he was establishing the Children's Fund, he invited me to come and MC those events. And a couple of times invited me to come and have a cup of tea with him. Just talk about things.
Really? Just to talk about?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes. And actually, when my late wife passed on, a few months later, he invited me, my mother, and my kids to his wife. They were still to his house.
Yes.
They were still very young, and we had lunch together with him. And at one point, post his tenure as president, invited me when he was in Waterberg area, Limpopo, to do. We wanted to interview him for carte blanche, and he felt that rather than do it in Joburg, we must come to his holiday home there, and then we spend a weekend together. So it was wonderful to spend time with him, because off the record, there was a lot of stories and stuff that he would talk about.
Of course. I want to hear more of those stories, but we're going to take a quick break from Reality Radio. We have Tim Modise in studio with us, and we'll be back just after the short break.
Reality Radio. As real as it gets. The Feel Good Drive with Nicole De Silva.
Marketing manager of Sunshine Tour, Modise Mchali, business deals. Do you do that stuff?
Everything is mixed. You can't try and disassociate yourself from any part of the business or any type of the work. When I joined the tour, it was strictly marketing. Your role isn't solely as a marketing manager. You're a client services director. You are a commercial manager. You're doing so much and almost about convincing people, convincing them to be a partner of the Sunshine Tour. And then once they are, convincing them that it was the right decision, continually throughout the process, throughout the partnership.
Every day I'm hustling.
Monday to Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. only on 919. 919 has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, programming that is not harmful to children and that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. If you think we're not living up to that code, you can inform the BCCSA. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa to PO Box 412-365 Craig Hall 2024 or email the BCCSA at napsa.co.za. For more information, visit the bccsa.co.za. Reality Radio, as real as it gets, only on 919.
Reality Radio on a Friday night, every Friday night from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Tonight we are talking real stories and the memories that brought Tim Modise has. Thanks for being in studio again.
Thanks very much.
I love the fact that you have such clear memories of Madiba and the time that you spent with him.
Yep.
Now, don't you feel also that there's something that brought you into his orbit and him into yours? Because you are talking about two very important characters here, and I don't want you to discount the impressions that you left on South African viewers, radio audiences as well. You became a certain voice for a certain consciousness amongst South African people.
Sure.
Do you feel that within yourself? Do you feel that you actually played that role, or do you need me to remind you?
No, let me take a step back. Before Madiba was released from prison, I started talk shows on Radio Metro
Right.
in the late 80s. And this was on the back of what I felt was the popularity of the station on the entertainment front. That we had a lot of people across the nation looking up to the station, enjoying it, but it was focused more on entertainment, and nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But at the same time, we had the uprisings happening around the country, especially on the East Rand and the Vaal area and parts of Soweto. And these were our listeners. From my point of view, I felt that there was something going on in the black community that needed a valve, a platform to be expressed. But since we could not outrightly discuss politics, I started shows discussing the social issues that affected people, like health, the labor issues, and legal matters, the type of things that we had to negotiate anyway.
Education.
And those became a feature on the station. And then when the first war of Iraq broke out, in fact, prior to that, now and again something would happen that would make me deviate from those topics and discuss indirectly, so to speak, politics. One other thing that I think is not generally known is that when the former president's father, Govan Mbeki, was released, I got the opportunity to talk to him. And prior to Madiba being released, Mr. Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, and others were released. And then I got the opportunity to talk to them as well. So
Incredible.
by the time Madiba himself was released, I was a sort of known personality in the community that, this is the person who deals with these matters.
And known and trusted.
Yeah. And something that others may not recall is that Ms. Mujanku Gumbi, who went on to become political advisor of former President Thabo Mbeki, was actually a regular guest on my show then. And we were talking about the rights of people in the context of South African laws at the time.
Yeah.
So, and she's an activist in her own right from the Black Consciousness movement. So Dr. Victor Ramatesele, who went on to be the doctor of Bafana Bafana, was a regular guest on the show talking about health issues. And so in a way, it was like whatever happened once the announcements were made about the unbanning of the liberation movements, ANC in particular, PAC and others, and the release of prisoners, particularly people like Nelson Mandela and others, we were more or less ready. The platform was there. So I felt we needed to have a platform. And I must take this opportunity to thank Brakuas Khadebe, who was the station manager, because he was the man taking the risks, working for the SABC to allow that type of content to be aired on the station. And he encouraged me and actually protected me in a career context that, I did not have to deal with the corporate politics. I had to focus on the work that I was doing.
So was that happening behind the scenes? Was he fielding all of that for you?
I would assume so. I mean, it probably must have come under pressure that why do you have such a program on air?
Yeah.
And as it happened, at the same time, Dr. Agri Cluster, the editor of the Sowetan newspaper, realized what was going on at Metro at the time. And one of his deputy editors, the late Sam Mabi, said, but why don't we cover this show in the newspaper as a feature? So they had a dedicated person at the Sowetan covering what was going on the radio station. So,
I see.
Within a short period of time, it would have been embarrassing to all concerned if the show was taken off, I think.
That's really interesting, though, because you were generating content based on what people cared about.
Yes.
And given what was going on in the discussions on your talk show, there was column space being allocated to that kind of content.
Yes.
You became a columnist as well at some point.
Yes, I did become later, but for the City Press.
Okay, and you were covering the same kind of social issues?
As a columnist, I was more commentating on whatever topic I chose to comment on.
Yeah.
And in itself was a very rewarding and educational experience for me, because if you let's say wanted to talk about the DRC and the civil war that was going on there, then you have to immerse yourself in the topic that you're going to talk about. So I learned that you not only do you just express an opinion, but go and get your facts right, get your facts straight when you write commentary stuff. Yeah.
So let's also look at the evolution of from the time you started with the radio show, that you went into discussions with South Africans talking about what they cared about.
Yes.
Then you've got the column coming up. Later on, you started working as a columnist. Now you're looking at an era of social media. And I know that you're on social media as well because I'm connected to you. Sometimes we might share an article or a view.
Yes.
You always maintain, again, that very steady balance in your posts. Imagine, if you will, if we had social media back at the time that the CODESA discussions were taking place, at the time that Madiba was released, at the time you went into our first elections. What do you think social media would have done then?
I'll take a step back before talking about social media and talk about technology itself, the evolution thereof. Because, in the first place, we did not even have access to landline phones. Not everybody had access to that.
Yeah, true.
And cell phones were introduced a bit later. But I think what would have happened, depending on the conditions of the time, if the National Party was still in charge, it would have been very much restricted anyway.
Exactly.
It would have been proscribed in a very serious way.
Exactly.
There would have been serious censorship.
So it wouldn't have been social media as we know it anyway.
Yes, and on top of that, probably it would have been very expensive to use a cell phone and even get on the social media at the time. So the point I'm making is it depends on which regime is in charge of what where in the world. You know, because there are parts of the world today, as much as social media exists and cell phones are there, where people do not just discuss as they like, whatever they wish to express themselves on. And in fact, I would suggest that even in the freest, so-called free societies, that there are some restrictions with the use of algorithms,
Yes.
we are told,
Yes.
where you know certain content is kept away from people and some is openly censored anyway, so people cannot have access to it. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Julian Assange
Yes, of course.
is locked up in the UK. He's appearing before the courts now. Not many people know why he's there and why this case has been going on for this long, and why at some point there were threats to execute him,
Of course.
as an example. But on the other hand, it is thanks to social media that people can see for themselves firsthand what's going on in the Palestine, in the Israeli attacks on the Palestinians and so on. So I'm talking about social media in a broad sense, but in South Africa, long-winded answer, I'm keeping it short now. If the conditions were the way they were and the government was the National Party, they would have restricted a lot of commentary in social media, and other people unwittingly, those who may not understand the dynamics of political movements and activism as it happened that time, would have landed themselves in serious trouble unnecessarily, because the activism of the time, you know, it had specific people who were leading it.
Of course.
And most of the, and I think that's why it was, to my mind, more disciplined than what we see now. You know, those who were informed would be the ones who lead. Those who were courageous enough would be the ones who lead. Not just a random person who's excited would be put in front of a group of people, because they'll be sacrificed unnecessarily and they would have been innocent in what would have happened. So I recall that, you know, you'd be discouraged if you were still a young hothead and you think you must stand in front. The veterans would tell you that just leave it to us for now.
Do you consider yourself an activist?
I would think so. I think I think along those lines. I think like an activist. Yes.
I feel very strongly that it's almost as if it's an entire course that went missing suddenly in school, because going through through high school in the 80s, coming out to university in the 90s, that was my era. It feels as if activism was very much built into South African society at the time. So it was almost as if you could reach out and you could be close enough to the activists of the time that would guide you, that would inspire you, that would motivate and mentor. It feels as if that entire that body, that culture of activism is no longer that accessible. That's how it feels to me. Does it feel the same to you?
Yes, I'd say not only does it feel that way, but it's the way it is. I mean, activism was not something that people got into in order to make money.
Sure.
It was high risk for whoever got involved. It took a lot of time. There was no money in the first place. I think that point must be made. And secondly, it was risky on the part of those who were very, very active, in your face type of activists, because they could be made to disappear.
Absolutely.
They could be arrested, they could be killed, and their whereabouts would not be known. So, you know, it was certainly for the very committed and the very brave, and let me add, the extremely conscious people.
Yes.
Personally, I drew inspiration as a young person from a person like Steve Biko. When I got to know about him, never met him personally, but got to know about him, and unfortunately and tragically how his life ended, that moved me a great deal to know that a young person like him was of of that nature, and was that courageous, but also so knowledgeable and so willing to share through, his ideas by himself and through his friends.
Yes.
It was a serious eye-opener for many people of my age at the time.
And to think that, his voice among so many others are no longer here to guide and mentor us. But we will hear Bra Tim's voice coming back. We're going on a short break now. This is Reality Radio with me, Jack Devnarain, and we'll be back after this.
Reality Radio, as real as it gets. Only on 919. Breakfast on demand.
What about a passionate couple neighbor? They always seem to be either fighting loudly, or once they've done with their fighting, they make up loudly. Do you know what I mean? They used to wrestle all the time. I'm sure they used to watch like the World Wrestling Federation.
No, what do you do?
This is John Cena.
With Shane Hunter, Monday to Friday, 6 to 9 a.m. on 919. 919 Top 40 with Linda Mbuso.
It's such a weird dream. So me and Doja Cat, we have a chat, and I'm like, hey Doja, I got your song on the chart, we're playing it, blah blah blah, something like that. She's like, okay, cool, thank you very much. I go off and I meet a friend of mine, right? And then she's driving past slowly, then I say, bye Doja.
It's giving groupie vibes, but okay.
But I'm just saying bye to her because she's driving past me and it's going to be awkward pretending we just didn't chat. So I say, bye Doja. This is what Doja says to the guy driving. He's so irritating.
But even in your dreams, you're irritating.
I said what I said.
Every Saturday from 3 to 7 p.m. We all love a good story. Stories of love and life. Stories that entertain and inspire. And the best stories are the ones that happen to be true. Every Friday night, Jack Devnarain is live in conversation with an iconic South African personality who shares the true stories that shape their remarkable lives. Join us for Reality Radio, as real as it gets. From 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. every Friday night, only on 919. Reality Radio, as real as it gets, only on 919.
Reality Radio on a Friday night with me, Jack Devnarain, in studio, Bra Tim Modise. Bra Tim, I'm just thinking of the evolution. The last thing we spoke about just before we went on a break was the evolution of media, of journalism, and I have to say that, and I know you're involved in training and things now. You do a lot of consulting, working with media outlets and young broadcasters. It feels to me as if now you have a number of people who are journalists who tend just to take the content, the raw data that they're being given, especially if it's coming from a source like government. So there's a government spokesperson, there's some kind of a briefing. They just take this content and they shove it out there through their outlets without interrogating the ideas that are contained in them. Is this something that you are seeing as well? And is it a real thing?
Yes, no, I think it is the case. And I wouldn't blame the journalists per se. I would say, the so-called generalization of the newsrooms is at fault here. And the commercial elements of how news media works these days, I suppose, is the thing that drives that. You spoke about social media earlier on. The other thing that I think informs some of the journalists is this point of getting likes and so on, and being first with a story without checking the source, verifying, giving context. Secondly, generating a followership and therefore generating likes and so on. So I think the pressure to become a let me call it celebrity somehow is the thing that's at fault here. Because if you're going to give deeper context, you must read, do more research on the story. And also it may not be, ultimately your report may not be as sexy or as sensational as you'd like it to be. So those could be some of the factors.
That's a big thing though. Sensationalizing the news is a thing. It's also given rise to what we see now as clickbait.
Yes.
And this is entirely a function, according to my understanding, of sensationalizing something. So there's a commercial drive to get people to make a news item seem sexier than it is,
Yes.
in order to get people to focus on that. And this is that just a reality that we are unable to divorce ourselves from in the modern era of media, social media, and broadcast?
Because there's such a deluge of news and information thanks to social media, that information comes to you. You don't go to the media.
Right.
So it's very difficult to discern as audience in the first place what is useful and what is not useful. You know, because some of the stuff is sent to you anyway. If you are on Facebook, on the different social media platforms, on Twitter or X now, you are just bombarded with a lot of stuff, and you would not know what is news and what is not news. So I noticed that amongst the audience, people who consume information, I would suggest that they consume a lot of information that's not relevant to them, and may not be aware that it's not relevant. I'll give an example. I mean, we are told repeatedly by researchers and even the state itself through Stats South Africa, for instance, or the Human Sciences Research Council, CSIR and others, what the challenges are that face South Africa and our communities. But a lot of people would rather go and check more entertainment stuff than mobilize young people around challenges of unemployment, lack of economic participation, the unsafe communities that we live in, that we haven't really had that type of dialogue in the open using social media platforms. I think social media platforms offer a good opportunity for people to mobilize in favor and in support of their aspirations. But we're not doing that.
No, we're not. So, missed opportunity there. I'm going to turn this question around a little bit, because I started off saying I'm worried that we don't have a lot of journalists who are paying attention to the real stories and interrogating the ideas behind them. I want to take this into a bigger context and ask, are we expecting too much of our politicians now, or are they just not living up to the level of discourse that we had seen taking place with very mature minds, very enlightened minds from the Mandela era? Is this an unfair comparison?
I don't think it's unfair, but I also think I'll go back to the point I made earlier on. Remember, politics pays now. So
absolutely.
So, you know, that's the difference. There's an incentive to become a politician. Whereas in the past, there were too many disincentives not to become one. It was a high-risk business. You could, using Madiba as an example, you could be locked away for that long, 27 years. Other people, lost. I mean, prior to him, people like Mr. Robert Sobukwe lost their youthful days. We mentioned Steve Biko, lost their lives. Chris Hani is another example, lost his life just before the elections. So it was different. You know, these were people who were very serious about dealing with the grievances of their people. Whereas now, I mean, you can go in and
well, I came armed with a water jug here, just in case, because I understand this is also part of political discourse nowadays. I understand people can turn this into a kind of a weapon, apparently.
There you go. Of course, I mean, there are people who've been badly injured as a result of this.
I know it's terrible, but it's just to think that this is what we have devolved into. To me, it's astounding, because I look at what the mandate must be when people say, here's my ballot paper, I'm putting an X next to that logo because I believe in that party, I believe in their manifesto, I believe in their vision and their set of policies in order to direct the future of our country. That's what it means. And I feel in a very strong sense it gets cheapened on both sides when, number one, the political party takes that mandate for granted and they start chucking around water bottles and ridiculous things like that, or disrupting procedures, whether it's in council or in parliament, on the National Assembly. It's also cheapened when you have voters who don't take the time to educate themselves. So I worry about what are we left with. We are now coming into an election phase again, and we have started all kinds of rhetoric. It's almost as if we need those sober minds again to step up to say, everybody calm down. This is what it's about.
I suppose, Jack, the problem is that democracy, the freedom we wanted, is a huge responsibility on its own. And it's not a responsibility of those who are in charge. It's a responsibility of citizens.
Right.
To familiarize themselves, firstly, with what democracy or the Constitution is all about in the first instance, and what the role of the citizen is in that system. Because many people, I get a sense, are not aware that they are employers of the politicians.
Right, exactly, yes.
So every time we vote, it's like signing a new contract or amending the contract and getting new people in. We think that it's a favor to employ new set of politicians. It isn't. It's a responsibility. You've got to analyze what they're all about and make sure that as the shareholder, if citizens were to regard themselves as shareholders, are you happy with the way our organization, South Africa, is being run? And what matters to you in your immediate situation as an individual, as a family, and your family as a member of a community, and your community as a part of the bigger South African setup? Are you happy that you have not been receiving clean water for the past 20 years or so, when everybody is getting water in other parts of the country? Are you happy with that? Are you happy with the fact that there are no useful schools in your neighborhood? Are you happy that you live in fear of, for your safety and your life? All those things. It doesn't matter. The way I think about it is, it doesn't matter what you say, as a politician. What should matter is what I expect from the system, given the resources that we have. Of course, there are limits to the resources that we have. But the capacity to deliver on the expectations of the people, the barest minimum, we do have that. We are told, about the money, the budget is there, taxes are paid. The South African system, with all its faults, is good when it comes to collecting from the public and the economy, but somehow not good when it comes to using those resources efficiently and effectively. So I think if we were to adopt the mindset of a shareholder, the game would change somehow, because then we'll hold the politicians accountable.
I love that idea, South Africa as an organization. And if I'm correct, you at some point, you were also part of a project like that.
Yes.
Brand South Africa. What was it called?
Proudly South African.
Proudly South African.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? What was it all about?
That experience was just on the back of the opening up of the economy, with imports coming from other parts of the country, and some sectors of our economy being put under pressure. For instance, textile, as an example. South Africa used to produce clothes, everything. We had a very active and serious textile industry here, from shoes to suits to shirts to whatever we wore. But then cheaper imports came in, and a lot of jobs were lost, and some factories had to close shop. And other things that were basically produced in South Africa were also being displaced or being done away with and being replaced by cheaper imports. So the role then of Proudly South African was to say the smaller businesses must be plugged into the different value chains of the different sectors. So let's say a big steel manufacturing company, how can that company work with the smaller guys down the line so that what they produce can be then turned into useful products by manufacturers, let's say of kitchen sinks and stuff like that, and then the retailers, and so it goes. That if you plugged in, particularly the smaller, medium-sized businesses, into sectors with big South African players, we could generate more value and hopefully increase the number of jobs that were being created, as well as create the conscious and awareness among South Africans that there's something that's going for our economy, and we should participate in it.
And that I see that in all around the world, you know, wherever you go, if you're going to go into a local store, you're going to find products that are made by that country.
Yes.
And it's supposed to inspire the same kind of patriotism that we should be feeling in South Africa. So, I think Proudly South Africa is a massive project that feeds into what you were saying earlier about using South Africa as an organization, seeing yourself as a shareholder in that compact.
Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful idea. I'm just going to leave it there. We're going to go into a quick break now. We're going to come back and talk more about Bra Tim, his life, and all the stories that shaped his wonderful journey. This is Reality Radio. We'll be back with Bra Tim after the short break.
Reality Radio, as real as it gets. Only on 919. 919, your soundtrack of happy moments. Breakfast on demand.
What would you buy if you won the lottery, okay?
The first thing I would do if I won the lottery is I'd hire a public relations officer to get a doppelganger or something to convince all my conniving and gold-digging family members and friends that it was a different Steph that won the lotto. That's what I do.
With Shane Hunter, Monday to Friday, 6 to 9 a.m. on 919. The Feel Good Drive with Nicole De Silva.
Marketing manager of Sunshine Tour, Modise Mchali, business deals. Do you do that stuff?
Everything is mixed. You can't try and disassociate yourself from any part of the business or any type of the work. When I joined the tour, it was strictly marketing. Your role isn't solely as a marketing manager. You're a client services director. You are a commercial manager. You're doing so much and almost about convincing people, convincing them to be a part of the Sunshine Tour. And then once they are, convincing them that it was the right decision, continually throughout the process, throughout the partnership.
Every day I'm hustling.
Monday to Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. only on 919. 919 has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, programming that is not harmful to children and that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. If you think we're not living up to that code, you can inform the BCCSA. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa to PO Box 412-365 Craig Hall 2024 or email the BCCSA at napsa.co.za. For more information, visit the bccsa.co.za. We all love a good story. Stories of love and life. Stories that entertain and inspire. And the best stories are the ones that happen to be true. Every Friday night, Jack Devnarain is live in conversation with an iconic South African personality who shares the true stories that shape their remarkable lives. Join us for Reality Radio, as real as it gets. From 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. every Friday night, only on 919. Reality Radio, as real as it gets, only on 919.
You're back with us, 919. This is Reality Radio. My name is Jack Devnarain, in conversation this Friday night with Bra Tim Modise. Bra Tim, do you miss the vibe of music radio stations?
I actually do.
Yeah.
I do, because one of the happiest memories of my work was doing music radio and talking to artists generally.
Yeah.
And when I reflect on why and how I got to be involved in radio, I think it was more my love for the arts than anything else. And the other stuff, evolved over time. But it was more, meeting artists across the board, interviewing them, enjoying music with them, sometimes going into recording studios with them.
Yeah.
And up to this moment, most memories I have are of people like Ray Peary of Stimela,
Yeah.
who was a good friend of mine, and Brahiu Masekela, who I got to meet as soon as he came back from exile and got involved in his concert tour of the time, Sekunjalo.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, we ended up becoming friends. He was friends with a lot of people, but I got to know him a little bit more, and he was a hot man. He was Brahiu.
Yeah.
But regaled me with so many stories of what happened when he was still young before he went into exile, what happened when he was overseas, the countries he lived in, the friends he made, the mistakes he made, and all of that jazz. Actually, the outstanding interview for me in my life was an interview I did with Al Jarreau.
Oh, wonderful. All
Yes.
right,
Because I grew up, appreciating Al Jarreau's music. Not in my life did I ever imagine that I would meet him in less than 14 years of beginning to appreciate his music, because I was exposed to his music in the late 70s.
Yeah.
And his album, Live in Berlin, was one of the first albums I bought for myself with my own money.
Yeah.
And by 1993, when he came to South Africa, something else. And we happened to do the interview on a Sunday, and I did not have a technical assistant to assist me with.
Yeah.
But they brought him in, and I had time with Al Jarreau with no one in the studio.
Incredible.
And we had such a whale of a time
Yeah.
with the interview, and I discovered he was such a fun guy, one of the friendliest people I've ever met in my life. Made me feel good many times over, and I never forget that moment.
That is such a rare thing, though, because this man is a globally recognized composer, jazz musician, and for him to be so engaging,
Yes.
it's such a rare thing to be that open to just a free conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting. Instead of it becoming a Q&A type of thing, it became a conversation, and it felt like, to me, somebody I'd known for a long time, and he also made me feel like he's known me for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So there was laughter there was too many jokes being told, and I actually enjoyed it. And we happened to do an event together, fundraising.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned the Mandela de Klerk debate, there was an event in Sandton at before Sandton, at Sandton Hotel, where they'd invited Corporate South Africa to make donations and so on for voter education and other things of the time to support the work of the CODESA setup. And Al Jarreau volunteered to perform as a gift to South Africa. Sipho Mabuse was also part of that.
Yeah.
And then I compared that show. So
that is a career highlight for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Do you think somewhere in some archive there is a recording of that interview?
I hope so. I don't know. I don't know if we still have those archives at SABC, but I hope so, yeah.
That's going to be worth following. I love the fact that you've remained quite close to the performing arts, though, because a lot of the times when we had interviews, you'd invite me onto a show.
Yes.
It'll be about what's going on with you guys. Like, why is there so much exploitation and abuse, and why is it not regulated? It's still close to your heart, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because to my mind, and that's how I grew up, I think before I could know many more things of the world, I got to know through the artists. So to me, they are the consciousness of the people. I mean, if you go back to the days of Gibson Kente, how long the theater play, when the rallies, political rallies could not be held, there was always a message in his place. Not the only one, though. Mbongeni Ngema being one of those people who would raise the people's issues, the concerns. The musicians did the same. So, to my mind, the art is a reflection of a people. Both in good times and bad times. So, I mean, even now, I'm sure you'll agree with me. Many people will agree. Before you know anything about the United States, you know more about the artists first.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. That's the window into the society.
It's such a strong point to make, because it's through performance, through music, that we are able to reflect the culture of the
people.
The people.
Yeah.
There's the language, there's the values.
Yes.
Whatever is popular, whatever helps us to communicate with each other, whatever is current in the way we engage with each other, is reflected in our cultural icons and in film, television. All those things are examples, in the same way that fashion and music would all serve that purpose.
Yeah.
So I can understand then why you would want to stay connected to all of that. But there's a world of conversation I still need to have with you. We only have a few minutes left, but I would like to know what brought you to the point of saying, I see myself in the world of broadcast news, journalism, radio, and eventually TV. At which point did you say, I see myself in that role?
It was something that happened accidentally, actually, at school, as it happened.
All the best stories start off with that.
I'll be very brief with the story. I was asked to render an item at school, and I had not prepared anything. But for some reason, I'd been following rugby commentary on then English service.
Yeah.
Our English teacher encouraged us to do that. So I had not watched rugby before. I was not that familiar with it. But thanks to radio, I more or less knew how the story of rugby is told. And then I gave that rendition at school using the language that they use.
Yeah.
And everything about it. And I think it pleased the teacher so much. Then he asked me to do it in front of everybody else.
Yeah.
And then it was expected that I would do this thing all the time. But it grew on me. And then my love for music was another thing.
Sure.
Where my friends would encourage me to play music. Because I started, I started collecting music relatively early, my own music. So I got too immersed in both broadcasting and the whole idea of music. But at the same time, being interested in information.
Right.
So, putting all those things together, radio was a good place to be, to express my voice. So I actually did it because I think I'd like to express my life that way, and it gave me the opportunity to do that.
And how did you get into that? Did you like go and chase somebody down and say, I need you to listen to my
Yes, I did. A lot of times I did. I did. But one friend of mine insisted, and nearly went somewhere else to work. Actually, I did in a factory for 2 months, 3 months. Said, no, you don't belong there.
Oh.
You better go to a new station that had been established at that time. Music Radio 702, as it was called. It was founded in Garankuwa. That's where they started operating from, and that's my hometown.
Yeah.
So he said, write a letter, I'll take it to them. Application letter. I went there, did the auditions, did not succeed, but I insisted that I be given a job. So they gave me a job as a program assistant.
I love that, okay.
Which exposed me to people like Stan Katz, Koki Bull, and other people, including Casey Kasem of the United States Top 40. It was my job to compile stuff for them. So I was exposed to how the radio station works.
From the production side?
Yeah, from the production side. And within a year, then I went to Radio Bop and I got a show there, did morning shows. And then did news for SABC. Then later auditioned for Metro, got a job. And then from then on, around, this was 86. So then the train just carried on like that.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. I have this is special to me because most of my work in the media industry has been as an actor, on-screen performer. My only exposure to radio was occasionally when I do a 30-second radio spot for a radio commercial.
Sure.
So to have this opportunity is a big deal for me because I'm interested in stories as a storyteller.
Yeah.
But I realize it's the same on radio, right?
Yes.
And this was the revelation for me. So I'm very grateful that I've got a good friend, Kanthan Pillay, who heard my idea, he liked the proposal, and he said, all right, well, listen, I'll give you a Friday night slot.
Yeah.
Which is why we're here. So this is a big deal. And it was actually in that conversation that Kanthan said to me, listen, he's got ideas that he'd like to share. We are sharing some ideas here on radio, but he decided he was going to write this book. And he wanted to make it a manual for South African people who are interested in how do we address the big issues like education, like the economy, like state-owned enterprises. What is the perspective about, and based on current research, this is what we know, this is what's likely to happen, and this is what we can do as an intervention in order to fix it. He's put all that into a book, and he very graciously has decided, this is not just a prop, by the way, Bratum. This, he says, is a gift to you, which is my great pleasure to present to you.
Thank you.
How to fix South Africa.
Yeah.
So Kanthan decided that this is to show, thank you, just to say we really appreciate you being on the show. And of course, to all the guests to come on to Reality Radio, the big smiley face, that is also yours.
No, I appreciate it. Rajak, thank you very much for hosting me and inviting me to on your show and to have this lovely conversation that we had, because it made me remember stuff that I've not been thinking about for some time.
We are going to continue the conversation long after this show is done. But I want to say a huge thank you to everybody. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Remember, this is Reality Radio every Friday night from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., talking about the wonderful stories that shape our lives. Have a great evening and a great weekend.
And thank you too.
All the cars on your route today have working indicators. 919.